after about 10 minutes of the boat trip, the guy just points and he says, Obonjan. And you just see the island just on the horizon. I'm in amazement and genuine experience in awe whilst I was walking around. I can only liken it to when they went down the hatch on Lost, the Dharma Initiative. It was just incredible. That's when we signed the contract for the islands. We needed a lot of money, so like everything was delayed. There was just an enormous amount to do, having loads of like outright massive arguments. It was just total chaos, like just pure chaos. It was as if like there was so many red flags. I always have this image of this like field of red flags and me just like prancing through this field without a care in the world of red flags going, woo, look at all these red flags. Aren't they beautiful?
Picture this. It's late July 2016 on the mainland harbour dock in Croatia. Standing on the pier are hundreds of excited holidaymakers and international journalists, bags packed, waiting for the morning boat to take them to a highly publicised, brand new paradise. But out on that island, hidden from view, is a scene of pure operational chaos. There is no paradise. There's an unfinished building site covered in rubble, a team of exhausted promoters, and basic running water that isn't even switched on. This is Obonjan. My guest today is Dan Blackledge, promoter, founder, and co-founder of both Hideout and Unknown festivals. Long before he held the keys to a broken island paradise, Dan spent 2 decades building things that didn't exist before he imagined them. It starts, as it so often does, with club nights. Newcastle in the early 2000s, a borrowed computer, and a mate who disappeared with the money. When Dan first stepped onto Obonjan years earlier, it was a 56-hectare landscape frozen in time, littered with the decaying stone relics of past hopes and dreams. It felt less like a holiday destination and more like stepping directly into the Dharma Initiative from Lost. In part 1, we tracked the vision, the impossible contract, and the moment reality collided with the dream. We asked how you keep going when the thing you've built is simultaneously the most beautiful and the most terrifying thing you've ever seen. We start at the beginning. I'm Angie Taus, and this is All Gone Wrong.
What brought me into the industry? That's taken us back to about 2002. It's a long time ago now. I went to Sunderland Uni for a short spell, for a very short time. And there wasn't really much happening in Sunderland music-wise. Like, it was a big deal if Brandon Block was playing at the Union. So me and some mates used to go to Newcastle to a club called Scotland Yard. So I'd say that was my introduction to electronic music. Specifically, Scotland Yard was just one of those original super cool clubs where you just went and had a great experience and heard really good DJs. So that's where it started in terms of interests. And then I quit uni early and went traveling for a year and did all these sort of random things where I just kind of went and met someone and went, okay, yeah, I'll go and do that with you, and ended up in these places that I didn't really plan any of it. That's a little bit what happened with the first club night. I was chatting to a mate in Sunderland, and he was like, "Oh, I'm mates with AIM from who was on Grand Central Records, and Mark Ray, whose label it was." He said they're my mates, and I reckon I can get them to come and play for us. Should we do a club night? I was like, okay. And I'd never considered it before, so I was like, oh, yeah, why not? I was always having ideas for various businesses and things like that, but never really did anything about them. So yeah, we set about, putting on a club night. So went over to Newcastle, outed out what was going on around there, and I started speaking to World Headquarters, and they were at a sort of a transition period where their original club, which was this super cool 150 cap, like family-run, family-owned venue, was being closed down. So they got relocated. So they said, oh yeah, why don't you do one of the opening nights when the new place opens? So that was the idea. And then like what transpired was I'd booked the club night, I'd booked a date, and then my mate was struggling to get hold of AIM and Mark Ray. And then actually, this is something that's fine to put in because it's true. He ended up nicking some money off me, and I never saw him ever again. And I'd booked this club night, and I was like, so what do I do now? I don't know how to I don't know how to do this. But I thought, well, I'll give it a go because I'd quite like to do it, So I worked out how you would book an artist. I went round Newcastle looking for club night posters for a night called Traveller, who used to book like Giles Peterson and Jeff Mills, and I couldn't find any. And I popped my head into the uni and said, why aren't there any Traveller posters? When's the next Traveller? And they said, Traveller's stopped. And I was like, that's interesting, because some of the stuff I wanted to book is what they used to book. At that point is the point where I kind of went, okay, I'm going to do this. This was obviously before MySpace, and I didn't have a laptop. I had just like a brick Ericsson phone. I didn't really use the internet because there was no need to. So I borrowed the computer in the office of the promoters that I worked for at the time. So I used to just give out flyers for money. I'd actually mentioned it to these guys who were quite good promoters at the time, saying, like, there's a gap and I'm really into this sort of music, and I think it'd be really great if we did that sort of thing. And they were like, we're not interested in that, Dan. We do this sort of music. If you want to do that, go and do it yourself. So I was like, okay, I will. So I used a computer and tried to book Mr. Scruff. Couldn't get him. Tried to book AIM and Mark Ray. Couldn't get them. I was like, who have you got then? And they were like, well, there's this artist called Dynamo Productions, which was Andy Smith, who's a DJ from Portishead, and this other guy called Scott Hendy. So you can have them. They've got an album coming out now, like 500 quid. It's like, yeah, that was great. I'll book them then. So I booked them and booked the club and got my mate to design the flyer and set about just giving out flyers and putting up posters in Newcastle. About 150 people turned up to the first one. And then I'd already booked the Herbalizer for the next one and got a better poster design, so it looked a bit cooler. So I had them on and took both floors this time of the club, and got these other guys called Slum Science who were like Chicago House to play downstairs. The Chicago House downstairs and UK hip hop upstairs. So I did that and then got 500 people in for that one. And then I'd already booked the next one, so the poster was up for the next one, which was MK, who was Roots Maneuvers DJ. So and that one went nuts. It was the last one before the summer term ended, and that was like 250 people queue around the corner. And so this was only my third club night, and it just gone nuts. And the owners of the club, like, you're a genius at this. You're a brilliant promoter. Like, you can have whatever dates you want. I was thinking, okay, I just thought it would be obvious to put up the poster for the next night, But most people apparently didn't do that. So they thought it was great. I absolutely loved it because it was a massive buzz. Getting that many people in, the music was wicked. It was just really fun. It was really, really fun.
And then how did it level up from there? So you've mastered the art of promotion, the poster. What point does that step into from what is being a bit of fun and almost experimentation to a career?
I wonder whether this has come up. When I was a bit younger, my dad said I think he had a particularly bad time at work, and he pulled me aside and said, Dan, never, ever get a job like mine. So I was like, okay. And he was a managing director of a big food factory, so food production. I was like, okay, fine. So when I decided to be a club promoter, he was like, what does that mean, you're going to be a club promoter? I said, well, we book DJs and we print flyers and posters and we try and get people to come and pay to get, they said, so it's gambling. I said, a little bit. And he said, you can't do that. And I said, well, you said never get a job like yours. And he said, well, I didn't mean this. And I said, well, you should have been more specific. I just saw it as, well, I can do this for a job. Why not? Because I saw Steve Butler, his name was Leon. They were called my bosses at the time. I was like, well, they're doing it for a job and they're smashing it. So they used to be involved in the Southport Weekender as well. So I saw how, and I used to go to Shindig as well, and these sorts of nights which were at Foundation, which were doing 1,500 people, something like that. So I was like, well, they do it for a job. They do it for a job. Why can't I do it for a job? So I just figured out that I could probably do it for a job, not realizing that actually, you don't win every time. It's not as easy as the beginner's luck that maybe I was blessed with on those first couple of sellout nights. It's interesting. I like the social element of it. I like going out to other people's nights, but I liked the feeling of putting on your own and inviting all your mates there and booking the DJs that you wanted to see. And then it was cool getting to meet them. You'd do everything yourself. You'd book them, you'd arrange their hotel, you'd go and pick them up from the airport with your little sign, and you'd go out for dinner with them and be really awkward because you didn't know what to talk about, because you didn't really know that much about music and you thought they knew loads more than you, which they probably did. So you were just making it up as you went along. I just thought, this is this is really fun and I'm making some money from it. So why can't I do this? So we went to like twice a month, and we won some and we lost some. I got a friend on, my best mate, Matt, at the time, was at uni. He actually completed his degree. He also worked for Red Bull. So I got him on board and we joined forces and we did it together for a few years. Then there was a kind of structural change at Foundation, the bigger club where Shindig was, and promised like a trance night. So there was an opening there, and they, they offered us to move there. So we came up with another night, which was called Wax On. So the other night was called Central. So Stop Central, started Wax On at Foundation, 2004. First night was with Justin Robertson, and People Get Real. That was a risk because we did it in summer. So we got like 400 people, and then we came back after summer. That one went better, like 800 people. And then we booked Jacques Lacan and Milo in November, and it just happened to be around the time that Drop the Pressure was like got in the top 10. Jacques Lacan was just already, and again that one just went absolutely nuts, and there was a queue around the corner. It was capacity and people couldn't get in, and basically exactly what you want. It was just an incredible night. Everyone played. We had Freak Nasty in the back room. It was just sick. It was just one of those nights that just went nuts, and then everyone was like, this is amazing. And then the next night we had Errol Alcan and Ivan Smag, and then we went on from there, booking people like that, T. Schwartz and Annie Mac and Semi Mobile Disco and Plump DJs, and then we kind of went into a bit more techno stuff like Dave Clark and Jeff Mills, and that's how we started venturing. Well, we wanted to venture out and I wanted to do stuff in Leeds because amazing scene in Leeds at the time. So we had a lot of friends down there. And again, there was just a gap. No one was doing what we were doing in Leeds. So it's like techno was really, really well covered. So I think the first night I did at Leeds was the Northern Lights, which was a pretty Wild West sort of venue, to be honest. I remember some of the lads who we were mates with did nights then, and they were like, mate, like the doorman are going to try and fleece you, so watch out. And it was a really stressful situation because the doorman, you're counting all the money at the till, and people paid on the door then. So you just had loads of cash, and the security kept going, oh yeah, mate, you're right, we'll take that up to the safe for you upstairs. And I was like, no, you're all right. And then we go, no, it's just what we do here. We'll take it up for you. You're all right. No, you're fine. So I was constantly batting off security all night, trying to nick my money, basically. So stressful. And that one, we hadn't got the numbers in. We lost a bit of money. And that's like, to be honest, that's for like, very amicably, me and my mate Matt parted company. I was like, look, do you really want to do this as a career? And he slept on it and came back the next day and said, no, I don't actually. Because I said, I really do. He said, I don't really like the amount of risk that's involved. I was like, that's fair enough. I was like, what do you want to do? And he's like, well, I want to join the Navy. So he became an officer in the Navy. He's like Commander Reese now in the Navy, which is mad. He was best man at our wedding last year, which is nice. So that friendship's endured all those years. So yeah, I kind of took it forward and then started doing events at Leeds Uni. And then we started doing some bigger stuff there, like 2,500 cap, and grew it like that. God, yeah, this is probably my first all gone wrong moment. So when we were doing really, really well at Leeds Uni, most events would sell out. And then the uni offered us the chance to do a bigger event. Leeds Uni would do the summer ball, so it's like a kind of 1-day festival they do as their end of year summer ball for their leavers. I don't know if many other unis did that. It's pretty cool. So we do a Wax On stage there, and then Metropolis, who I'd come to be partners with in a year down the line, had do another stage, and that's where I met Mark Newton, who was running Metropolis, and we met in a lift in a hotel. I think he was like in a lift with a scratch permits or something like that, and we were all on our way to the venue to do the uni summer ball. The next year they offered me a second day to do a Wax On day event, so I took them up on that. Booked a pretty big lineup. Primal Scream were headlining, Reverend and the Makers, Plan B. We had I think we had a hospitality stage before hospitality was as big as anywhere near as big as it is now. Wall of Sound stage. We had Errol, Annie Mac, loads of our regulars. If you looked at it now, it looked much bigger than the amount of people we were trying to get in. But it just didn't go very well. Like we didn't, we were club promoters, and I didn't know how to promote a festival at the time, but I tried. Like with all these things, someone suggests something that I like the idea of, and I go, yeah, all right then. and just get on with it and just give it a go. So this is where I think I got my first humbling was that. So it didn't go very well, and we couldn't meet the payments for the production company, and so that was my first foray into dealing with like pissed off ticket holders and refunds and like owing people loads of money and stuff. And I remember Will from Will from it's the agent for Crosstown Rebels at the time, going, God, like most people would have just got on a plane and fucked off. But good on you for not doing that, because I just battened down the hatches and made my apologies to everyone and just cut deals with everyone and then paid them back over time and just carried on doing club nights. It was a pretty tricky time, but I just kind of made it right with everyone, made it right with all the agents. And it's funny, I think, when you go through things like that and then you come through the other end and you go, look, I'm going to make it right, and they give you a chance because they like you, and usually you do a good job, and all their artists like playing for the brand and all that sort. So you had a lot of goodwill. So they went, okay, we'll not ruin you, we'll not blacklist you, we'll give you a chance, and then you come good on that, you know, you keep to your word, then I think that buys you a lot of credibility in the future as well. So that was one thing that came out of that. Then we started to we carried on with the club nights. Yeah, that was like 2008, 2009. Mark Newton from Metropolis said, "Oh, I'm going out to Ibiza." We went together and teamed up with Ibiza Rocks to kind of bring all the music. So Metropolis was drum and bass and hip hop and dubstep, and when that was coming through, so we went to Ibiza together and started reclaiming the dance floor in San Antonio with Ibiza Rocks, and kind of brought all the music to the island that we did in the UK. Did that for 2 seasons, and then during that time we joined forces. So we merged Wax on the Metropolis and formed Electronic Music Group. And then it was in the second season of Ibiza 2010 that me and Mark had both separately been offered this site in Croatia, which was called Zercha Beach, which Outlook Festival started at in a club called Aquarius. So we both got offered this site, and this is in Croatia. And we chatted about it and said, oh, why don't we do it together? So we were batting around ideas, and I think we decided to do a new thing, but we weren't sure what we were going to call it or anything like that. But we had our heart set on going, okay, we'll do something for about 1,500 people. And then Mark was due to go over there at the end of, either the end of 2010 or like right after Christmas. And he drove to the airport and got snowed in or snowed out of the airport car park or whatever. It was snowing and it was bad, and it meant he couldn't go. So I went to Zercha instead on my own. And it was January 2011. Met all the guys over there who would become our partners. There was people who worked in travel. There was some of the club owners, the guys who owned Papaya were there. Met them in this restaurant. It's funny, I walked into this restaurant in Zagreb, and there's just a big circular table with loads of Croatian men sat there all staring at me. They're like, are you hungry? It's like, yes. I think my flight had been delayed, so I think they were all starving. What will you eat? I was like, steak and chips will be good. Okay, we'll all eat steak. So they ordered steak and chips for everyone because they all ordered what I wanted to eat, which I thought was quite nice. So we all ate this meal together and had wine and chatted about the idea and stuff. And then the next day we drove to Zercha Beach. And it was just this mad place. And just this huge beach, obviously with the ocean in front of it, but it was like a bay. So there's these huge mountains opposite the beach and opposite these clubs, and then forest behind it, and these big open air venues. So Papaya is like 1,000 capacity open air venue. Aquarius, I think, was like 3,000 split across 2. At this time, it was 1 open air venue and 1 indoor venue. And then eventually they grew another part of it and created a bigger open air venue. So even looking at those 2, I thought, like, well, we can't do 1,500 people here. They're going to be lost in this. And then I also spotted this like rusty looking thing down the bottom of the beach. I said to the guys, well, what's that down there? They went, oh, no, don't worry about that. That's nothing. I said, oh, no, I really want to go and look at that. So I went down, and it was just this kind of like ramshackle venue made out of wood that looked a bit dilapidated and stuff. I was like, this is sick. Like, we need to include this as well. We'll take the whole beach. So went back and thought, well, we can't do 1,500 people. It needs to be at least 5,000 people for the first year. So this was like me, Mark, and Will from Metropolis. We chatted it through, like, yeah, let's do it. Got Steve Allison on board as well, who owned the Faversham in Leeds, where we had our office upstairs. So we were kind of sat downstairs, and me, Mark, and Will were chatting, going, yeah, well, I don't think we can really afford to do this on our own. Even though the club nights were doing quite well. And then Steve walked past and we're like, should we ask Steve? Literally, he was just walking past and we all just went, yeah, all right. Steve, come here a minute. And then he came over and sat with us and we're like, right, we've got this idea. Do you want to get involved? And he went, yeah, all right then, sick. So Steve then got involved and then he became part of our company. Electronic music group. So there was 4 of us then. And then Mark and Will from Metropolis were really tight with the Warehouse Project in Manchester because they did Metropolis at Warehouse Project. They pitched it to them and they said, yeah, we want to get involved. So we got them involved as a partner. So it was like us 4 and then Warehouse Project came on board as well. So that was 2011 and we did the first event in the first weekend in July. I think it was like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, the first week in July. So it was a mad turn. So we had to book it all, design all the stuff, build the website, and then sell all the tickets in that period. And that event was called Hideout Festival. So yeah, we got 5,500 people in year 1. So that was good, and it felt like it felt like something quite special was happening there in that first year. And then it went from there. And that one was just like super successful. We still booked a great lineup for the year for year 1. It was like Sven Vath, Marco Carolla, Annie Mac, too many DJs, Jamie Jones, Seth Troxler, Lazarus, all that crew, Andy C. And the second year we kind of stepped it up and booked Ricardo Villalobos, who was one of my favorite DJs at the time, still is. Fortet, back to back with Caribou, Chase and Status, Paco Dice. It was a really, really, really good lineup year 2. That one, I think we did like 8,500 tickets to that one. Because we didn't know how big we could make it. We were just kind of doing it and seeing what happened. And next year we'd add a bit more on. So that grew quite quickly. It was 5.5 in year 1, and it grew to like 17,000 by like year 4, something like that. I think in year 3 we booked Disclosure and Rudimental. We created this video 2 friends called Gus and Mario did, and they did a really good job on the videography at the event. So they captured the event really well, and the video was really good. And we picked a really cool Disclosure track as the soundtrack to the video. The video went nuts. I didn't have the language for this at the time, but it went viral. Didn't know what that was back then. That wasn't a thing. So that video went viral, and then we booked Disclosure and Rudimental for year 3, I think. And then that's when I think we sold out year 3 in like 15,000 people in 2 weeks. So something daft like that. It went nuts. And then we just, again, gradually over the next couple of years, just added a bit extra. I think 17 was the total that it could carry.
And where does that take us up to then? What year are we in now?
So it got up to 17,000 by like year 4. In year 5, so
2015.
It was after, so 2015 we'd hit that 17,000 mark, but in 2011 me and Steve got taken to Ravine in northwest Croatia, which is near Pula, and got shown this beautiful. It was a campsite, but it was 2 campsites next to each other owned by the same group. Had like a really old retro hotel on one side, so we were like, oh, we might not use that side for year 1. And on the side we did use, it had loads of space for camping, and then it had 3-star apartments, and then they were building 4-star apartments at the time, like really beautiful. It was by the sea, and it had a forest in it with this concrete platform, and it was almost like someone had built this campsite so that you could have a festival at it. And it had this like long, expansive main stage looking piece of grass. Oh, you can have a stage there. It's right by the sea, flanked with trees, tents to the left. It was all just perfectly laid out. It had a big swimming pool going onto the sea, with a balcony for the DJ to obviously stand on and play from. And it was just the perfect site. So we decided to design a new festival for that site. So then we did Hideout 2012, which was a success. In 2013, we launched Unknown as well. So we sold out Hideout that year, 15,000 people really quickly. And then we launched Unknown, which was going to be September 2013. And that was really, really fun festival. I'd been to Secret Garden Party in 2012, but I was insane. I'd never experienced anything like it. I was like, wow. And it really, really opened my mind to what was possible, and how much fun you could have at a festival and how wild something could be. And I thought, well, this is cool. So I thought, well, let's take inspiration from that. And I was also, although I hadn't been yet, I was inspired by Burning Man at the time. So we created this new festival called Unknown, which had live music, and it had theatrical element to it and games. Like we did a massive paint fight, and there was just just crazy shit happening, and that sort of thing. It was a bit more wild and arty and colourful and creative. And we booked a really good lineup for that. We had like Disclosure and Subtract and Richie Horton and Moderat and Jamie XX and all in year one. Again, if you look at that lineup now, you go, that would cost millions of pounds to book that lineup now, but at the time it didn't. We got 8,500 people to that one, but we got hit by a massive storm on day one, and it just obliterated the site. People's tents and clothing in the trees and getting washed downstream. We had to set up camp in that retro hotel next door for people. And after the big storm, it was kind of all right for the rest of the week. But the following year, we got bad weather again at that festival. So we had beautiful 2 weeks build time, glorious weather, and then the festival hit, and it was just crap weather for a week. So we thought, we can't continue with this one. So we stopped that one. Our travel partners for Hideout, Hugo and Wolf, they're called, brilliant guys. They were our local DMC, the destination management company. So for Hideout, they'd contract all of the beds. They'd sort out all the accommodation, which we'd then supply to the customers that had bought tickets. And they dealt with all the transfers, and they'd organise the boats for us for the boats party. So they'd organise a lot of the logistics on the ground. And then they introduced us to the Unknown site. And again, we did the same partnership with them there. Like none of these things would have happened without them. And they just had, they had this map of Croatia and all of these sites. So they took us to quite a few different sites, going, can we do something here? Can we do something here? It was often the case was no. And then after the second Hideout, they took me to Obonjan Island, told me about it in advance. Oh, there's this island, and it's like this 56-hectare island, and it's really beautiful, and there's some infrastructure there. And the way they was describing it, I was just thinking, I don't believe you. That was my initial thought. Like, I don't quite know what you're talking about, and I don't really believe that what you're saying is correct.
Why was that?
It just sounded like bollocks. This is part of my French. It just sounded like that's not true. Maybe something like, I'll go and see what you mean, but I don't think what you're saying is true. There's just this island that we could take over, and it can just be our island, and we can do whatever we want on there. It's like, that's just not true. Or else, why would someone else not have already done that?
What were they saying then? So you're able to lease it?
Take over was the choice of word. Like I said, they've taken us to loads of different sites, and some of them were not workable. And to be fair to them, they just wanted to do as much stuff as possible because it was in their interest for us to bring more people to Croatia. So we were cautious, thinking, well, they need to be right, and we need to get that feeling from the site. Whenever I've been to a site before, you just get a feeling, or you don't. You can see a thing, or you can't see a thing. And maybe someone else would go to the same site and see a thing, and someone else wouldn't. But that was just my creative take on it. It's like you either see the thing or you don't. And with Unknown, we very much saw the thing. Same with Hideout. And after the second Hideout, which had been a massive success and so much fun, and riding high off that, they took me to Obonjan Island, which is this small 56-hectare island off the coast of Šibenik, which is just a bit further southeast down the coast, because it's closer to Split. So we got to Šibenik, which is a beautiful town, and we got on a little speedboat. It was beautiful weather, and even just the journey from Šibenik, when you leave the port, you go through this like mouth, this like small opening that you get into the expanse of the ocean, and there's just all these beautiful pine trees. So there's pine trees right until the shoreline, basically, in Croatia. That's what makes it so beautiful. There's not really sandy beaches. It's just all rock, pine trees, and then just the most beautiful crystal clear blue-green water. And that's what makes it so beautiful. So you're already going out on this boat with Hugo and Wolf and Pero, this massive Croatian guy driving the boat.
How are you getting that feel at that point?
As my memory serves me, those journeys out were often, sometimes we'd talk and sometimes we were silent. And on the journey out, we were all just taking it in and be amazed by the journey itself, I think, in the first instant. And then the boat trip's about 20 minutes. It's something like that, about 20 minutes out. So after about 10 minutes of the boat trip, the guy Pero just points and he says Obonjan, and I'm like looking at it, so you just see the island just on the horizon, and you're like, okay, right, that's where we're going. And then we dock up, and there's this guy there with the Croatian guy, very tanned, Guinea with a massive black moustache, and his dog. I was like, who's that? They're like, oh, that's Mirko. He lives here. I'm like, so basically, the only inhabitant of the island was Mirko and his dog Jimmy. This guy meets us there. We brought him a shopping bag with sandwiches and cigarettes and some tin food and stuff in there for, to stock up his supplies. So that's what you did, apparently. So yeah, he was happy to see us. So was his dog. So we got off. You were looking at the island and going, the history of it is it was planted in the 50s by the Forestry Committee. So a lot of the islands over there are quite barren, whereas this one was full of pine and olive trees. So it smelled beautiful on the arrival. And because it's got all these trees, you can't see into it. You can only see this little bit to begin with. So there was the East Harbour, which was concrete and big stone platform. With a couple of steps in it, and then up a bit was a path and this kind of really little ramshackle sort of restaurant type thing. Like it had a few chairs outside of it. It had a little hatch into the kitchen, and then there was a big hardtop building. So you saw these buildings, and no one had been there for 10 years. So it had originally been built by the Scout movement. So the Scout movement kind of took over in the 70s, and they just slowly started building infrastructure. So they built the port first, obviously, so that you could get boats there, so you could get supplies there. And then they started building pathways, and then they started building buildings, and they built a stone amphitheatre out of the limestone rock out of the island, so that overlooks the ocean, and you can see the horizon and other islands dotted around. It's just incredible. So they give us the tour, and Mirko's just taking us around, shows us, and he's got this round little bucket of keys, of like rusty keys, and he just happens to like stick his hand in, have a shuffle around, and picks out the right key to get us into the restaurant for this one. And then the amphitheatre's open, and then you go up the hill, and there's this big cowshed looking thing. Like we named it the cowshed initially, later became called the pavilion. So that was again this so the big concrete pillars of the roof. And so my mind's thinking, I'm kind of in amazement, and I was genuinely experiencing awe whilst I was walking around. So my mind's thinking, this is awesome. Instantly I got the feeling, instantly was like, we've got to do something here. And then as we're walking around, like the amphitheatre, obviously you see bands playing on the amphitheatre, the pavilion for talks and food. You see starting to kind of piece it together as you're walking around. And we walked up further, and there's this massive big restaurant with a big, huge empty swimming pool. And we went into the restaurant. I can only liken it to when they went down the hatch on Lost, the Dharma Initiative. Do you remember that? It was like that. I'm going, this is weird. And we're pulling the dust sheets off the big brat pans and the cookers and the rationale ovens, like loads and loads of kitchen equipment, this massive kitchen. You go like, this must have serviced like a couple of thousand people. Now, yeah, there was like a couple of thousand scouts that had like camp out on the island. So we thought, well, it's big enough to do a couple of thousand people then, right? So that's probably one of the first areas where it went wrong, but with the capacity. So anyway, it was just incredible. And like, so we were looking at all this kit, and then he took us up a bit further into the woods, and there's like a 500,000 litre water tank that then serviced the island. So there was all pipes under the ground, and they had to get water shipped in. And this was infrastructure, like I said, but it had been built from the 70s, and this was 2012 when we were looking at it. So loads of it was almost derelict, I'd say. Some of it was working, some of it was derelict. And there was all these other weird little hardtop accommodation units, that all these platforms, like concrete and stone platforms, where they used to put all the tents. There was toilet blocks and all these sorts of things. So there was loads of infrastructure scattered around the island. So it's just incredible. So yeah, that was just like a mad experience. So then I was like to the guys, to be fair, yeah, this is real. And they said, so what do you think? And I said, I'm having quite a lot of thoughts about this one. And their original idea was to make it into a party island. The reason they were taking me there was to say, do you want to do a hideout here? Or do you want to do something else here? When I was there, I just got this feeling of, no, don't do that. I think that will potentially wreck it. I think these were my initial, rightly or wrongly, these were my initial thoughts and instincts. Was I don't think you should do that. This is the most beautiful thing and the coolest thing I've ever seen, and don't bring all sorts of mad club brands here because I don't know if that's what this wants to be. We should create a brand around what this experience could be, and it should just be that. Not to say that we couldn't do brand partnerships with people, but I felt like it needed a global brand that it was, that it stood for something, and that it was something. It was a particular type of experience, and people would come for that. So that was my initial loose idea. And then on the speedboat back, I was mulling it over, and then I think either later that day or the next day, we got the catamaran to Hvar, where I would meet a guy called Nicola, who was the person who was kind of leading the acquisition of the island. So on the way to meet him, I was making a lot of notes very, very quickly and doing some sums on my phone to kind of counter that original idea. And then I remember showing the guys and said, like, I think we should do this. Like, this would be the concept, this would be the experience, and look at the numbers. And they were like that. That's a lot of money. I don't want to sound like a big money person or anything like that, but I'm more creatively led, as we'll find out. But I did the numbers like we'd done before and gone, well, look, if we do 1,500 people here for the summer and it's 8 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever, that's what you can turn over. And their eyes popped out their sockets. Like, that's a lot of money. This is a small country. That's a lot of money. I was like, yeah, I know, but I think that's what it can get to. And then we went to meet Nicola in Hvar, and he's this like 6'5" tall Croatian guy with tattoos and a God Save the Queen Sex Pistols t-shirt on. So I was like, this guy looks pretty cool. I think I'll like him. And he's just mad, but brilliant. So we had dinner. He took us out to this awesome restaurant. We drank a lot of wine and rakia, and then me and him stayed up in the hotel all night till about 7 o'clock in the morning, drinking red wine, as you do. I was a lot younger then. I could do things like that. Now I can have like 2 glasses and I need to go to bed. So yeah, we stayed up all night in the lobby, and at 7 o'clock in the morning, we were talking about the idea, just thrashing it out. And literally at 7 o'clock in the morning, he went, "Okay, we shall be partners." And we shook hands and went 50-50 on it, basically. And that was that. And then we started working on the concept from that point on. So that was 2012. 2014 at Unknown Festival, the second Unknown Festival, is when I was getting messages from Nicola sending me Croatian contracts that I couldn't read. And I was saying, what is all these? And he rang me up and said, I think we can slowly pack our things and move to Obonjan. And I said, is this 100% certain? And he said, no, but I'm receiving the contracts. He said, I think we're good. So at that moment, it felt like we were on at the end, sort of September 2014. The other thing that I will mention at this point, 2014, because it feels important to the overarching story of Obonjan, is that I was in a hotel owned by the same people that owned the Unknown site. It was called Lone, and it was a beautiful 5-star design hotel. It was just amazing. And in the lobby of this hotel, I was sat there having a beer, making notes in the lobby, and there was a magazine on the side by Design Hotels. So I was flicking through this magazine, and I stumbled on a page, and it was called Finding Infinity, and it was this guy called Ross Harding, and he had a company called Finding Infinity, and it was a sustainable development brand, and he was partnering with Designer Hotels, and he was doing some mad initiative like driving a motorbike around Australia powered by vegetable oil or something like that. And it was just to bring attention to sustainable development initiatives. This really resonated with me. So I started looking into this a lot more, looking into design hotels, looking into sustainability, those sorts of things. So that started to become a large part of what I was interested in going forward from 2014. When I got back that year, I did an online course in sustainable development through Coursera online. And so I was doing bitty bobby things to do with it, just taking a real interest. So when it came to developing the presentation for Obonjan that we had to put forward, I factored at least a slide in for that was about sustainable development and our approach to that from what I'd learned, again, quite surface level, but I felt like it was important. And I think they seemed to like that. The city seemed to like that. So I don't know whether that helped us get it or not, but that's kind of the story, because sustainable development became a kind of a core principle and goal, like something that we wanted to achieve over time.
So you're getting a contract signed. You've been told you're pretty much ready to move in. What else is going on around there? So what comes first? Are you already starting to thinking about how you're going to promote this? You're going to need that revenue. Is it still very much focused on build? How much time are you spending out there?
I was spending loads of time out there, and me and Steve were. We'd go on site visits all the time, and we needed to, but it was just loads of fun. It was part of it, going on the site visits, thinking about what things would be, who we'd work with, bartering with the bartering with the clubs, bartering with the owners, but it was constantly bartering with people, which is an interesting thing because you learn a lot about the culture of a different country by operating there. It's an interesting one. It's very different to ours. So we spent loads of time out there. A really important part of the story. 15 after Hideout 2015, a couple of things happened. One, we got approached from a bigger entity to buy Hideout from us, so that was quite a big deal. So we started those conversations. It was to buy the majority, so we would still run it, and they would take majority. And so we started those conversations. And also in July, that's when we signed the contract for the island. So we actually signed the contract completely in 2015. I had to give it was a press conference actually, but it wasn't sold to me like a press conference. So I stood up and did this like TEDx style talk for some reason, and it was just completely unnecessary. And I had a translator. I was told everyone would speak English, and it was just this thing. And I needed to do a talk. And I said, "How long should it be?" "Oh, not long, just about 20 minutes. I was like, "Okay." So I just brushed up on my presentation skills. The mayor was happy anyway, and what I said was sounded good. So we signed the contract, and we were selling a Hideout. We decided not to do Unknown in 2015, so that wasn't happening. Hideout was happening in 2015. Canal Mills was still going strong in Leeds, so we had a club, we had Hideout, and then we had Obonjan. This is the mad part. Like I said to you earlier, there's loads of bits where it all went wrong, and one was the contract itself. So we couldn't change the contract because the contract was the contract. It already existed. We had to buy the company that owned that contract before we could do anything. So we couldn't change a contract that wasn't our contract. And that was the deal. So it was like, buy the company that owns that contract or don't. And we were buying a contract that said we had to do a bunch of stuff that we knew we couldn't do because it wasn't possible. So the contract was impossible. Even if you had the money to do what the contract said we had to do, you couldn't do it in the amount of time that it said you had to do it in.
To get Obonjan, get the contract, you had to buy the company that already held the contract. And then was there an understanding from your point of view that once you bought the company and had access to the contract, there was then potential to change elements?
We told ourselves that would be possible because we'd be able to negotiate with the city. But they said, that is the deal. They spelled it out for us, and we were going, yeah, but sure, there'll be some wiggle room in it eventually. Like, if we do year one and they're happy, we'll then be able to change it. So that's what we told ourselves, even though they were going, no, like, you have to do what it says. No, you have to build a port for 50 yachts. You have to build 650 keys by year 3. The contract was mad. And
big stuff.
Yeah,
big
really.
Stuff.
Oh, yeah, really big stuff. Yeah, it wasn't like chuck up a few tents. It was full on like you've got to develop a resort. And it also said you have to open in 2016. Yeah, so all these really difficult things. When we signed the contract, eventually we appointed a company to do a feasibility study. We took this guy Phil on the island, who was a brilliant guy, and he was like a kid in the sweet shop, running around like with his pen and his notepad and his camera, and he's just like, this is like the best thing I've ever seen from an engineering point of view. So he was like in the pipes and in the sewage and in the water tank and in the assessing all of the the integrity of all the buildings. His take on it was quite interesting. They took an amount of time to present us with this feasibility study, and in our minds we were like, well, we want to do 1,500 people in year one, right? Which now saying that out loud sounds mad, but because we were doing so many people to the festivals, doing 1,500 people to this didn't sound like much. But actually, it wasn't 1,500 people for a weekend; it was 1,500 people a day for 8 weeks. So actually the amount of people collectively would have been a lot more than 1,500 people, but it's 1,500 at any one time. Yeah, that's what we wanted to do. And the meeting that we had in London, actually, so it was all of the partners. It was Phil stood at the front doing his presentation. It was Nicola, our in-house lawyer. I lived in London at the time, and Steve was with Nicola up in Leeds, and we were sat in this meeting, and Phil did this presentation with this feasibility study. It was a chunky document. A lot of work had gone into it. He did a really good job at the presentation. His final word was like, under no circumstances can you do 1,500 capacity at this island by next summer. It is not possible. Even if you had that much money, it's not possible to spend that amount of money on the things you need to spend it on in that amount of time. Because we had to do things like all the remedial work. So we had to clear all of the junk off of the island, beds and like springs everywhere, girders, chairs, all needed removing out. And some of the dilapidated buildings needed taken out. And it's, things like that. And then they had to like prepare it all. And, we had to dig a like 2 meter by 2 meter trench all around the island with a massive a digger and a jackhammer to see on a building site, like, because it was limestone rock. It's not just some mud. And this went for like 5 miles or something like that. We dug of that depth and that width. So stuff like that people would never even know was there or we had to do, that took months and cost loads of money. That had to be done. Building the wellness space and building the restaurant and refurbishing the swimming pool, building bars, and my 200-page concept document, versus his feasibility study. This is going to be the best thing in the world ever, with this like insane vision, which could have been a great 5-year at bet, to push a 5-year vision, but it's like, no, it has to be like this in year 1. So there was this big vision, and we wanted to do, the numbers, and we were under the pressure from the city. So we thought we had to do what we had to do. So that meeting, was crazy, because he said, no, you can't do this. Some of the partners basically went, well, you don't know what you're talking about. We're going to have to do it. So, do you want to be part of the team or not? So you can, well, yeah, I do. So we'll work around it. And I remember Nicola, I was sat next to Nicola, our lawyer, and she just turned to me and said, this is the most bizarre meeting I've ever been to in my life. She's been to a lot of meetings. Now, when I look back, because hindsight's a brilliant thing, we were all looking at the same thing, but in very different ways. And we were all massively overly optimistic and unrealistic about what you could achieve in the amount of time that we had with the amount of money that we had.
Can you remember if there was any narrative going through your mind around this point?
I was just thinking, yeah, I hear what you're saying about the 1,500, and I probably agree with you, but we can probably do 1,000, or we can probably do 800, like that sort of thing, going like, maybe we could get to 1,500 at a real push if we really pulled it out of the back. That was what was going through my mind. And for me, it was always like, yeah, but we're doing it. So whatever we have to do it, that is what we will do, because we're doing it by hook or by crook. Like, this is getting done. So just let's move forward and let's do what we need to do, and we'll work it all out as we go. That was kind of what was running through my head, because I couldn't get the vision that I had in my mind out of my mind, and how good that would be if it happens, which was to have all this super cool, beautiful eco accommodation, distributed around the island, and these beautiful little restaurants by the sea, like cooking on fire, people doing wellness activities, there being talks in the pavilion, there being the most amazing music, DJs and live acts, and we'll build a forest, and there's just so much potential. And that was what I was lit up by, was the potential by it all and the beauty of it all as a project, and also by other people who were attracted to the project, looking in, going, selling this isn't going to be your problem. People are going to be queuing for miles to buy, a ticket to this or a package to this, and that's not going to be your problem. Your problem is going to be building it. And actually, it turns out it was both was the problem. It was difficult to do both. So that was what was running through my mind, was, don't care. This is going to be amazing. The experience is going to be so good that not that none of this stuff matters, but like, we can get around it all.
How did you move forward from that meeting? Your own lawyer, who's seen everything, is saying this is bizarre.
Mhm.
No, you've got a year to do something that someone else has said is impossible. What was the way you moved forward?
I think that's it. I think we just started doing it. We kind of went, okay, we'll take the feasibility study away, we'll read it ourselves, and we'll compromise where we need to compromise. Oh, that's the other thing. The cost of it, that's where it really went nuts in the meeting, was he said how much it would all cost. And he was like, it cost 12.5 million euros. And me and Steve sat back in our chairs, were like, oh no, that's a lot of money. Rocky, I think one of the Croatian partners just stood up and went like, we can do this for loads cheaper than that. And to be fair, we all thought that, that was a lot of money, and that we were going, nah, because you'll just do, you just stick this there, and you'll just do, because we were festival promoters, so you just went in, you worked with what you had. You didn't need to build anything permanent. You didn't need to dig. We did go all out on the festivals in terms of decor and production and stuff like that, but you shipped it all in, you built it there, and then you moved it all away, and it was temporary. But this was different. But even though it was different, we were viewing it with our festival hat on, going, if this was a festival location, we had to come and put a festival on here, this is how we would approach it, so let's just do that. When the reality of the situation is, we were building a hotel, like a resort. We were building a resort. That was really what we were doing. But we were coming at it as if to say, like, yeah, but we'll just make it like a festival, so it'll be fine. Which probably would have been if it was like a 3-day event. But when you've got to operate something with guests coming in and out every day for the whole season, there's got to be all these other things that you've got to worry about. Running water and sewage and electricity and data cables and all these other things that you don't need to think about to the extent for a festival. So some do, but the ones that we did, we didn't. So we had all of that to contend with. We just started, to be honest. We had some cash. We each put in some cash and started. We got the remedial works done. We got it all cleared, and we started walking around with architects and creating a master plan. I think we went through a couple of different architects, landed on one. So I was doing things and involved with things that I was never involved with before, but that I really, really enjoyed doing. So my background with the festivals was concept ideation, programming and booking all the artists with Mark and Wilf, doing all the brand ID, all the marketing and the sales and things like that. And then worrying about what the customer experience was going to be. And Steve's role was very much operations. Like, if anyone's listening to this and they need to do a festival, ask Steve to help you, because he's sick at operations, like really, really, really good at it. So that was why it was a good partnership. I was that side of things, and he was that side of things, and we each valued each other's side as well. So we knew where we were at. There was a lot of time spent on master plan and back and forth with the city. There was loads of bureaucracy involved. It was really late when we got to break ground. It was really late. Like, I could have been as tight as 4 months.
4 months before due to open. And that's including digging the trench.
I can't remember exactly, but it doesn't really matter whether it was January, February, or January is already way too late. So whether you start in February or not, it's much of a muchness. So started all the work because we hacked down all the costs. We went, okay, it's going to cost that much money. And when we investigated it ourselves with different suppliers, like, okay, it is going to cost a lot. So we'll cut this down, we'll cut that down. So we just basically started cutting everything, which was difficult to do because I was still hell bent on this vision that I had, and it was slowly getting eroded, which was painful to me. But we had to do everything all at once. We had to create the brand and the identity and the marketing assets like the website and all those sorts of things, and book the opening program, because obviously we were programming it like similar to how we program a festival, but scattered across the season, right? So we were doing that sort of stuff that we would normally do, but at the same time we were doing the master planning, the remedial works, and all those sorts of things. I think the sale of Hideout took a lot longer to go through because we needed a lot of money. We were getting a bank loan from a bank in Croatia. We got a bunch of stuff on finance, like the bell tents and the lodges. We pay them a bunch of money, and then we get the rest on leasing. And the kitchen equipment, the same, the pool equipment, and all the equipment that we need, anything that you could remove, we got on finance with a small deposit, and then we got a big chunk of cash from the bank, and then we put in a load of our own money as well. So like, me and Steve had profits from the club and from Hideout, and then the sale of Hideout as well was kind of delayed going through. So we were always, and the bank loan was delayed going through. So I was also doing things like creating a business plan for this whole project to send to the bank in Croatia. And it's like, okay, so I had to do a whole marketing plan. It's kind of useful because in hindsight, those things were useful, but we wouldn't have done them unless we needed to send it to the bank. So we did a business plan, and it included a massive marketing plan and all these sorts of things, sent it to the bank. And eventually we got that cash. It was just late. So like everything was delayed. This is why, like, now I'm recalling it all, I've got a feeling it was maybe March by the time the bank loan went through. So we were doing as much as we could, but there's only so much you can do until you got the bank loan. Then we can pay for the actual bulk of the work and all of these other deposits and things like that we needed to pay for. Me and Steve were funding all of the brand and marketing stuff in my London office from our sound channel cash, right? So we were kind of putting in our personal money into the project for all of that side of things, like the deposits for the artists, like all that sort of stuff we were just covering. And then all of the build sort of stuff and all of the Croatian contractors and the suppliers over there were getting covered by the money over in Croatia. So there was just so much to do. There was just an enormous amount to do. So where I'd normally spend all of my time on the creative and marketing side, my time was split between that, managing architects and interior designers, creating business plans, having loads of outright massive arguments with my business partners on what to do and what to spend money on and what was more important and what was less important and all those sorts of things. So that was a very challenging relationship. So that was very, very time and energy consuming, was actually the management of the relationship itself. Because before, when it was just me and Steve, or me, Mark and Steve, and Wow's project, it was just so easy. We just went, this is what we're doing, we just did it. And we had a deal with the clubs on Zurcher, we had a deal with the campsite, and we were this and they were that, and it was relatively simple. This was like, well, we were all doing everything. So we had to discuss all of the different elements all of the time, and what would go here and what would go there, and should it be these lights or those lights. And it was just total chaos, like just pure chaos. There was no structure. There was no money. If there's no structure, no money. Obviously, there was no alignment on values hierarchy at all. So the container was wrong. The way the business was structured was strange. That was one of the things that caused issues. The other one was the team we had in place wasn't quite right, because we didn't have anybody on our team that was a hotel operator. And I found that out later when I met some hotel operators, and more recently went in, partnered with someone who's a brilliant operator, and learned what they did, and just thought, like, I held my head in my hands and just thought, if only we'd have had you then. Like, why didn't we have a you in 2015? Because then things maybe might have been different, because someone would have actually known how to operate a hotel. So you had 6 people. None of us knew how to operate a hotel, not one. So you had someone that did youth travel, someone that owned restaurants and bars in Croatia and the Hand in Ultra Festival, and you had us that did clubs and festivals. And no one had done hotels before, and we were all in denial that is what it was we were actually doing. Yeah, we were, no, it's not that. It's something different that's never been done before. That was the other thing. Like, no, this has never been done before, so it's not something that exists. So therefore, like, everything's up for grabs, and we can do this however we want, And I remember someone, we were trying to get involved in the food, and they sadly declined. Like, they were going, oh, this sounds amazing, we desperately want to do it, but we just can't. And I remember her saying to me on the phone, Dan, like, you're opening a hotel in 6 weeks. And even then I was going, yeah, but it's like, not really, if you think about it. And of course, that is exactly what we were doing.
In hindsight, were there any early signs like that, things that people said that were landing in a way that you were questioning the point that where you were at?
No, nothing was landing. There was so many red flags. It was as if, like, there was so many red flags. I always have this image of this, like, field of red flags, and me just, like, prancing through this field without a care in the world of red flags, going, woo, look at all these red flags, aren't they beautiful? Like that, and just like going through this. Honestly, in hindsight, when I look at it, that's literally what it was like, and I just needed a big click down the ear and to be like, just look at one of these red flags at least. Like, just please, for God's sake, just this one that you don't have any money, or this one that you've not got the right team, or this one that you don't agree on anything, or just completely different culturally, or and when I say different culturally, like, I think it's important that I'm clear on that. I don't want to come across as like ethnocentric here and be like, this is how it should be done because it's how we do it. And it's like, that's not necessarily right. It's just when the cultures are different, they're different. So in hindsight, what would have been a great idea is to go and look at how we each kind of see the world, and first and foremost, and therefore see the project, and like and try and do an exercise where we each try and see it from each other's perspectives. And this is all wonderful in hindsight, but at the time that was never going to happen. And that would be a good exercise to do if you're working with someone, even at a lower level than this, from a different culture, because you're going to see the same thing very differently, and you're going to have a different values hierarchy. So when you have a different values hierarchy, it means that you believe that this thing is more important than that thing, and the other person thinks that this thing is more important than that thing, and then you fight about that. It reminds me of this. One of the Croatian lads that worked, who was a waiter, and he asked me a question and said, "Who has the most aggressive voice?" And I said, "What?" And he said, "Who has the most aggressive voice?" And he meant in the management. I can't recall how I answered the question, but what I do recall is understanding. That's how this works. Sometimes it is whoever shouts the loudest gets the thing done.
There must have been a point when that transformation did start to happen.
Yeah.
So that's part one. From Newcastle club nights to a Croatian island. And the moment Dan walked around a building site in the July heat, a few steps ahead of everyone else, thinking one thing and saying another. Part two is where the real unravelling happens. Not just the project, but the partnerships, the finances, and the version of himself that he'd built his whole identity around. And then, what comes after? When the thing that broke you turns out to also be where you find everything that matters. I'm Angie Taus. This has all gone wrong. Part two is out now.